Is the sound coming through okay?
Yes. Yes.
Great.
The committee will come to order. First, I want to thank each of our witnesses for joining us today for this very important discussion. The second in a series of hearings that Ranking Member Portman and I are conducting to help bolster our nation's cyber defenses, ensure that the American people are safe from increasingly sophisticated online attacks. Although it can often be difficult to understand the complexity and the severity of some of these attacks from the outside, they have a significant cost on our national security. In many cases, these attacks can also affect our daily lives, as we saw with the recent ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline that was reported over this weekend. Officials are continuing to investigate exactly what happened, but the extraordinary measures the company took to shut down the pipeline and the possible ripple effects that that will likely have on gas prices and our economy down the line shows that attackers will always try to exploit vulnerabilities. We must continue working to strengthen our cybersecurity defenses and response plans to prevent these types of attacks from occurring in the first place and prevent them from having catastrophic consequences on our daily lives. That's why I will continue to push for common sense legislation to strengthen our response to these hostile assaults, whether they come from foreign adversaries or criminal actors that seek to harm our country. That's why I worked to secure $650 million investment as part of the American Rescue Plan to help Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the federal government prevent adversaries and bad actors from hacking institutions and federal agencies that are absolutely essential to our pandemic response. I've also introduced legislation with Ranking Member Portman to provide the Department of Homeland Security with additional resources and encourage better coordination to address attacks that risk the safety and the security of Americans. And while legislation and needed reforms will certainly help bolster our national security against these increasingly sophisticated threats, we also need to rethink how we approach cyber warfare. Our foreign adversaries, like the Chinese and Russian governments, do not rest. To successfully thwart their relentless assaults on the American system, we need to recognize that they do not view the federal government as separate agencies, but as one single target. That is what made the SolarWinds attack such a significant incident. A foreign adversary was able to infiltrate and spy on 9 federal agencies and dozens of private companies all at the same time, using the same vulnerability to access troves of sensitive data, including the emails of the acting Secretary of Homeland Security at the time. An attack line that requires a comprehensive approach, and we cannot leave individual federal agencies to fend for themselves against attacks from nation states. Agencies need to better anticipate their individual risk, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Office of Management and Budget need to take a government-wide approach to assessing cybersecurity threats so that we can better prioritize our resources to defend federal information systems. Federal agencies must also ensure that they are providing Congress with timely and relevant information in the event of major incidents so that we can work with our executive branch colleagues to help provide the resources and authorities that they need to address these threats. That's why I'm continuing my push to strengthen the Federal Information Security Modernization Act so that Congress can ensure our cybersecurity apparatus is working hand in hand across the federal government to support a coordinated response to cyber intrusions while providing transparency. Today's hearing will focus on the safety and security of our federal agencies and how our government's lead cybersecurity experts are working to protect the information systems of departments that are critical to safeguarding our national security and providing essential services to the American people. Today's witnesses are uniquely qualified to help the committee understand how agencies are assessing the damage of these recent breaches, what we need to do to combat these threats, how to improve transparency with Congress, and the challenges they have faced in recovering from these attacks. Protecting the American people from these ever-evolving attacks, especially in the face of a pandemic that has moved our lives increasingly online, requires immediate action on a bipartisan basis. I know this committee can work together to tackle these enormous challenges. And with that, I turn it over to Senator Portman, our ranking member, and thank him for joining me to address cyber attacks and to secure our nation. Senator Portman.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. I appreciate our bipartisan work over the years together on improving federal cybersecurity, and I look forward to continuing the partnership. You just mentioned some of the efforts that are underway. As many of you know, we're in the process of writing legislation right now to address some of these issues we'll talk about today. Today's an opportunity to really focus deeply on some of these attacks that have happened over the last several months. We already had one hearing on the SolarWinds hack, and today we want to continue that oversight with some witnesses from the agencies to talk about how we can learn from these incidents to improve our cyber defenses in the future. I look forward to hearing the perspective of these agency officials on the ground as they try to fend off these cyber attacks. In the last 6 months, hackers have executed 4 major cyber campaigns against U.S. government agencies and private companies. Those are 4 that we know of. And I say that because many of these attacks occurred months ago, and we only learned of them more recently. SolarWinds is one, Microsoft Exchange, Pulse Secure, and most recently, of course, the Colonial Pipeline. The SolarWinds and Pulse Secure VPN attacks targeted federal agencies, and yet it was private sector companies that discovered them. That should be concerning to all of us. Despite all the increased funding appropriated for cybersecurity and the bipartisan legislation we've worked on here in this committee, not one of these federal intrusions was discovered by the federal government. Cyber attacks are going to continue to be a threat, and the federal government needs to be able to identify those threats and defend against them. We continue to learn about these attacks. Here's some of the details we already know. First, after our last hearing, the U.S. government officially attributed SolarWinds hack to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, or SVR. So we've learned that since our last hearing. SVR was very patient and selected its targets carefully and compromised a trusted link in the software supply chain. It disguised its activity and used stealth techniques that evaded detection. Because of that, it took more than a year to detect the attack, a lifetime to be able to do damage for sophisticated adversaries like these. Second, we know the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange attacks were broad. Within the federal government, the SolarWinds attack hit agencies holding some of our most sensitive data and national security secrets, including the agencies before us today. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses about the impacts of recent attacks on their agencies. SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange attacks also impacted the private sector, even cybersecurity firms meant to protect our systems. For example, FireEye, the company who discovered the SolarWinds hack, was breached itself. FireEye is one of the firms folks call on when they discover a breach. So here, the very people we call on when we get hacked got hacked themselves. We are still in the very early stages of learning about the Pulse Secure attack, but recent reports indicate that at least 5 federal agencies were compromised in that attack. So we're learning as we go, and it's concerning. Third, the fact that the federal government was hacked is not surprising to us. In June 2019, we issued a report from the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. I was chair of that committee at the time. Senator Carper was the ranking Democrat, and that report detailed the extensive cybersecurity vulnerabilities of 8 specific federal agencies. Many of those vulnerabilities had remained unresolved for a decade. More than a year later, 3 of those 8 agencies were seriously compromised by the SolarWinds attack: DHS, State, and HHS. State's not here, but HHS is here, and we look forward to a dialogue about why HHS did not declare a major incident under the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, or FISMA. We talked earlier about FISMA and the need to reform it, but under current FISMA, it seems to me that should have been declared a major incident. I'm concerned that members of DHS's cybersecurity team who hunt threats from foreign countries and the former DHS secretary were compromised in the SolarWinds attack. and that we learned about this not from DHS, not from Cisa, but from news reports. Mr. Wales, I look forward to a discussion of how Cisa specifically, which is part of DHS, was impacted. And again, we'll refer later in the questions to those specific news reports I'm talking about. Finally, it's clear that cyber attacks are going to keep coming. Last week, cyber criminals attacked Colonial Pipeline, the company responsible for providing about 45%, almost half of East Coast fuel. This is potentially the most substantial and damaging attack on U.S. critical infrastructure ever. It shows that cyber attacks can have tangible, real-world consequences. Although our witnesses today are here to discuss the federal cybersecurity side, I think it's important that we hear from Cisa about what we know so far about this attack on the Colonial Pipeline and what we should be doing to deter, detect, and respond to attacks like this in the future. These 4 recent attacks have demonstrated not only the weakness of our defenses, but also the persistence and sophistication of our adversaries. In response, we have to take a hard look at the federal cybersecurity strategy, capabilities, and leadership, and discuss what changes are necessary to prevent and mitigate attacks like this in the future. At our last hearing, I asked our witnesses who is ultimately accountable. Who's responsible for federal cybersecurity? The witnesses were not able to give a clear answer, which is troubling. Under current law, each agency is ultimately responsible for securing its own networks, which is why we have asked the agency Chief Information Security Officers, or CISOs, to give their perspective today. But CISA must also have visibility across federal civilian agencies to be able to do what Congress created it to do, secure the networks of the federal government. Congress also created the position of National Cyber Director in the White House to coordinate implementation of national cyber policy and strategy as recommended by the Solarium Commission. The Biden administration has now nominated Chris Inglis, and I understand his paperwork is being finalized. It appears that the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology, Ann Neuberger, has also taken a leading role in handling cyber attacks based on briefings we've received. I believe that a single point of accountability is necessary. I think that single point of accountability for federal cyber attacks, overseeing all of this, the individual agency efforts and CIS's work to support them, is crucial to ensure we have proper responsibility and accountability. I appreciate the witnesses being here today. Again, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to your testimony on all these important issues.
Thank you, Senator Portman. It's the practice of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if you will stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony that you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Our first witness today is Mr. Brandon Wales, the Acting Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which we all commonly refer to around here as CISA. Prior to becoming Acting Director, Mr. Wales was CISA's first Executive Director. Mr. Wales has also served in multiple positions within the Secretary's Office for DHS, including Senior Counselor to the Secretary for Cyber and Resilience, Acting Deputy Chief of Staff, and the Acting Chief of Staff for the Department. Prior to joining the Department, Mr. Wales served as a National Security Aide to United States Senator John Kyle and as a Senior Associate at the Washington-based Foreign Policy and National Security think tank. Welcome back to the committee, Mr. Wales. Always good to see you. I will now recognize you for your 5-minute opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today regarding the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's response to the SolarWinds supply chain compromise and our broader efforts to enhance the security and resilience of federal networks going forward. As both of you pointed out in your opening statements, cyber attacks on our nation's infrastructure are growing more sophisticated, frequent, and aggressive. Malicious cyber actors today are dedicating time and resources towards researching, stealing, and exploiting vulnerabilities, using more complex attacks to avoid detection, and developing new techniques to target information and communications technology supply chains. We witnessed this firsthand through the SolarWinds supply chain compromise and the exploitation of Microsoft Exchange and Pulse Secure vulnerabilities. The SolarWinds supply chain compromise should have served as a wake-up call to our adversaries' increasing interest in targeting supply chain vulnerabilities. This highly sophisticated operation, attributed to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, involved the compromise of trusted software updates to inject malicious code into thousands of victim organizations. The primary objective of the SVR in this campaign appears to be gaining access to sensitive but unclassified communications and to identify additional opportunities to compromise IT supply chains. In response, on December 13th, the National Security Council staff stood up the Cyber Unified Coordination Group, comprised of Cisa, the FBI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, with support from the National Security Agency. As the lead for asset response in the federal civilian space, Cisa provided technical assistance to affected entities who requested it as they identified and mitigated potential compromises. Cisa's work in response to this campaign fell under 4 primary lines of effort: scoping the campaign, sharing information and detections, supporting short-term remediation, and providing guidance and assistance in long-term network recovery. My written statement provides a more detailed outline of our response and recovery efforts, so I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight areas of progress and what we believe is the way forward for a more secure nation. First, throughout SolarWinds and the other recent cyber incidents, there has been unprecedented and robust collaboration between the public and private sector. Industry identified the threats and informed us with little delay. And in the case of the exchange vulnerabilities, we were able to work together to take collective action to mitigate potential risks. The government provided the forum, but industry partnership allowed us to quickly reduce the population of susceptible servers and notify potential victims at a scale that the government alone could not achieve. We must build on this success and adapt to the increasing dynamic threat landscape. Since industry often sees malicious cyber activity first, we must continue to deepen operational collaboration with our industry partners. At Cisa, one of our top priorities this year is standing up the recently authorized Joint Cyber Planning Office, a recommendation from the Cyberspace Larum Commission that was authorized in the most recent National Defense Authorization Act. I want to thank this committee for its support, not only of this provision, but of all the cyber-focused provisions included in the NDAA that will continue to advance and strengthen our federal cyber posture. The Joint Cyber Planning Office will build on the success of our recent operational collaboration, unifying public and private sector cyber incident planning, and integrating the execution of the cyber defense operations conducted under CISA's asset response mission. Second, and echoing some comments from the chairman, we must rethink our approach to cybersecurity. Releasing alerts, deploying incident response teams, sharing best practices are important tools. But as the pace and scale of cyber threats that we face expands, so must our response toolkit. We need sustained investment to modernize and protect our most critical federal systems, as well as state and local governments, suffering under budget constraints and increasingly aggressive ransomware operators. Part of the solution is dedicated preparedness grants for cybersecurity, which Secretary Mayorkas has endorsed and Congress is considering. Another part of the solution is the establishment of a cyber response and recovery fund. I want to thank the committee for introducing S1316, the Cyber Response and Recovery Act. The establishment of a CRRF will ensure CISA has sufficient resources and capacity to respond rapidly to catastrophic cyber incidents. But investment only goes so far. It is imperative that we move to more secure and defensible architectures. We must transition zero trust from a buzzword to the baseline standard for network design and configuration. It will not be easy, smooth, or cheap, but the cost of not doing so is simply too high. CISA's charge is clear: protect and defend the federal government's networks through collaborative risk management. To accomplish this objective, we continue to drive the collective defense model for cybersecurity, apply the lessons learned from these recent cyber incidents to improve our capabilities, and raise the bar for long-term cybersecurity to be able to truly defend today and secure tomorrow. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this important subject, and I look forward to your questions.
Our second witness today is Mr. Ryan Higgins, Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Commerce. In this role, Mr. Higgins provides leadership for the department's cybersecurity program, which includes establishing policies and procedures for the department and its bureaus in accordance with the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014, implementing enterprise cybersecurity functions and coordinating incident response activities on behalf of the department. Prior to joining the department in March, Mr. Higgins held a variety of leadership roles in the Department of Justice, including as Assistant Director for Administration at the United States Trustee Program and several roles in the Justice Management Division Office of the Chief Information Officer. Mr. Higgins has also spent several years in the private sector as a practitioner in the areas of IT security policy and network security. Welcome, Mr. Higgins. Please proceed with your opening comments.
Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today to provide an update on the Department of Commerce incident response activities. I serve as the department's CISO and Deputy CIO within the Office of the CIO. I joined the department in March of 2020 and provide leadership for the department's cybersecurity program, which includes establishing policies, procedures for the department and its bureaus in accordance with FISMA, implementing enterprise cybersecurity functions in accordance with FISMA, and coordinating incident response activities on behalf of the department. As Mr. Wales testified at the committee's previous hearing on the SolarWinds attack, a cybersecurity campaign affecting multiple federal agencies, critical infrastructure providers, and private sector organizations was identified in early December of 2020. Within Commerce, NTIA identified indications of a potential systemic compromise related to this campaign and immediately began engaging with the department's Office of the CIO to initiate incident response activities. As a result of this engagement, the department was one of the first federal agencies to identify a potential systemic compromise in response to SolarWinds, determined that this was a major incident, and immediately initiated coordination with Cisa to assist. FISMA directs OMB to define the term major incident and requires agencies to notify Congress in the event of one. As defined by OMB, major incidents include those that are likely to result in demonstrable harm to the national security interest, foreign relations, or the economy of the United States, or to the public confidence, civil liberties, or public health and safety of the American people. Based upon what the department knew concerning the potential systemic compromise, an initial review showed it met the definition of a major cybersecurity incident. Within an hour of making this determination, the department notified CISA and OMB. Subsequently, the department, in accordance with PPD 41, sent a notification of a significant cybersecurity incident to the FBI, CISA, and ODNI to request coordinated support. And, as required by FISMA, the department notified Congress within 7 days and subsequently provided more detailed information. The department actively participated in the Cyber Unified Coordination Group stood up in response to the SolarWinds incident, which supported information sharing and coordination across the government for all affected agencies. Along with the hands-on assistance with respect to the identified compromise, CISA also released Emergency Directive 2101, which provided guidance for the department to further investigate and determine the scope of exposure at the department's bureaus beyond NTIA. The department completed all required activities for the emergency directive, including the 3 supplementals. Department and bureau representatives also regularly participated in CISA-hosted calls, which provided updated information about developments related to the incident. In addition to CISA, the department received assistance from the FBI and the Microsoft Detection and Response Team to investigate, remediate, and recover from the SolarWinds incident. We have concluded our initial engagements with each of these partners and received recommendations from CISA and Microsoft to inform our immediate recovery activities. Along with the remediation efforts in process by the department and NTIA, the longer-term recovery plan includes adapting and implementing Zero Trust for migrating to modern security architecture, conducting TIC 3.0 pilots for accelerating the adoption of cloud, mobile, and other emerging technologies, upgrading security features in existing solutions and services to maximize capabilities, and transitioning to cloud-centric models and replacing legacy on-premise infrastructure. In closing, I want to emphasize that we remain in close coordination with our federal partners to ensure that we are sharing relevant information through established channels and continuously identifying opportunities to strengthen our cybersecurity posture. While the immediate activities related to SolarWinds have moved from incident response to longer-term recovery, we must remain vigilant as the threat environment continues to evolve and our adversaries learn from these incidents just as we do. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins, for your testimony. Our final witness today is Ms. Vogel on the online here.
Yes.
Welcome. Our final witness today is Ms. Janet Vogel, Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Health and Human Services. In this role, Ms. Vogel has initiated transformation projects related to machine learning, authorization to operate, and cybersecurity reporting standardization. Ms. Vogel previously served as the Deputy Chief Information Officer and Director for Operations for the Office of Information Technology for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Ms. Vogel joined the HHS Office of the Secretary in 2018 with more than 25 years of experience. Her experience includes implementing the Federal Shared System for Human Resource Management, known as HR Connect, at the U.S. Treasury, and directing information technology policy and implementing the fee-for-service management of systems at the Federal Aviation Administration. Welcome, Ms. Vogel. You are now recognized for your 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today to provide an update on the Department of Health and Human Services incident response activities. I serve as the department's Chief Information Security Officer in the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and I've led the security program at HHS since 2018. My office establishes policies and procedures for the operating divisions and the department. We also implement and operate enterprise cybersecurity functions and coordinate incident response activities on behalf of the department. As we know today, the SolarWinds event was an unprecedented attack on the SolarWinds Corporation and its public and private sector customers. Malicious actors accessed the corporation's environment and introduced the malicious code. The code was then spread to SolarWinds customers through regular software updates. HHS response to this threat is detailed in the written testimony provided to the committee. I'll summarize some of those actions here. On the evening of December 13, 2020, I received a call from a Cisa colleague alerting me to malicious activity. We immediately engaged all of the components of Health and Human Services and joined the Cisa-led call. Action was taken immediately after that call to begin mitigation of any potential impact of the malware. We implemented enterprise security tools. We searched for the activity that would match the attacker's indicators, tactics, and techniques. We notified all operating divisions and began taking a coordinated action against the versions of the malicious software. We took all of those instances offline immediately and began analyzing the results. Soon after, we received Emergency Directive 2101 from the Cisa, and we were able to begin implementing and responding right away. On the next day, we were able to report out to Cisa our activities and how we have met the initial version 2101 requirements. Since that time, we also responded to any supplemental guidance. We utilized the tools provided by Cisa to help mitigate any of the potential impacts and also block all of the network access. During the investigation and remediation period, HHS identified several lessons learned, and we tested our best practices. Several of our practices align with new cybersecurity frameworks, such as Zero Trust. One example is that network segmentation and other defense in-depth practices can limit the degree of which a compromise in one system can spread to other systems. In summary, HHS will continue to take every necessary precaution to address this and other incidents like it in the future. We remain mindful that our adversaries are already developing other cyber hacking approaches and capabilities. With our partners such as Cisa, the private sector, and other federal and private organizations, we will remain vigilant. We're committed to addressing the unique and ever-changing challenges in cybersecurity to ensure all Americans' safety, security, and confidence in our digitally connected world. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, members of the committee, we appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Mr. Wales, I know we're here today to focus on federal cybersecurity, but I think it's important to discuss the attack that we have just recently seen on Colonial Pipeline, one of the largest attacks on critical infrastructure in our history. Last month, Ranking Member Portman and I introduced the Cyber Response and Recovery Act, which would give the Secretary of Homeland Security the authority to declare a significant incident and use Cyber Response and Recovery Fund after events like this. I know you're familiar with the legislation that we've introduced. And while I understand it's too soon for this to talk about this in relation to this specific situation, we're still learning a lot about that, and we'll see the impact of that in the days and weeks ahead. But if you could answer the question is, how would this new authority enable CISA to provide more assistance during these types of incidents, and whether they occur on privately owned critical infrastructure or the federal systems? What's your assessment?
Sure, sir. And again, we think that this is an absolutely instrumental advancement in the country's ability to respond to significant and catastrophic cyber incidents. We have seen that our adversaries are increasingly focused on broad, significant campaigns, campaigns that do not focus on any individual sector. They are not limited to just the government. And in the face of those broad campaigns, we want to ensure that we have the resources to surge our support, our incident response, and our prevention activities to the scale that they're needed. And in particular, the kinds of entities that most often come to CISA for assistance, state and local governments, small private sector companies that don't have the resources and organic skills to be able to respond to incidents of the scale and severity that we have seen. A cyber response and recovery fund will be essential in ensuring that we have those resources, we can expand our capacity, and we can support our ability to get ahead of catastrophic cyber incidents. So we are eager to continue working with Congress on the establishment and execution of such a fund.
Well, I appreciate the support of that legislation, and you talked about the additional resources from the fund. Could you be a little more specific to give folks a better appreciation as to how those funds would be used to help in situations like we've seen?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of different ways in which we would potentially use those funds. First is to ensure that we can expand and surge CISA's organic incident response teams, bringing in additional, for example, contract resources to build out our cyber defense teams to allow us to go on site and assist potential victims. It'll be used to deploy additional sensors and technology at sites that we are responding to. It could also be used to reimburse other agencies for assistance. So there are times when we establish agreements with the Department of Defense to surge activities from the surge resources from U.S. Cyber Command and others. And right now we have to take that out of our existing resources. We would have the CRF in the future to be able to reimburse those agencies for the assistance that they're providing on behalf of CISA to support our partners or the potential victims in the field.
Mr. Wales, SolarWinds was a critical cybersecurity incident because the sensitive information that was accessed, but also the widespread impact that it had all across the federal government as well as private sectors. FISMA, however, doesn't seem to account for this kind of widespread intrusion. From your perspective as the lead operational agency for federal cybersecurity, Do you agree that we need to consider the scope of an incident? How many victims are affected, for example, when evaluating its severity?
Yes, and as a point of fact, we score incidents ourselves using a scoring schema that was part of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. And one of the factors we look at as part of that is the scale and scope of the incident.
When you issued your SolarWinds emergency directive, you requested that every agency respond with details of their compromise to help determine both the number and the severity of which each of the different agencies were affected. Is that a correct reading of the directive?
Correct.
Why was it so important for Cisa to understand the overall severity of the threat? If you could explain that for the committee, please.
Sure, and as I pointed out in my opening remarks, one of the lines of effort of CISA's work in partnership with the other UCG members like the FBI is understanding the scope of the incident, because that's going to help us ensure that we are providing support to the right places. We understand the objective of the adversary. We could look for potential compromises in places that has not yet been detected. And so it is instrumental in any of our additional cybersecurity work to understand exactly what happened.
So to Mr. Higgins and Ms. Vogel, clearly the departments vary significantly in when and how they declare a major cyber incident and share information with Congress. And while I understand that early on you may not have known all of the details of the intrusion, a notification that says, quote, something happened, end of quote, without any additional details or context, quite frankly, prevents Congress from conducting effective oversight. The law governing this is FISMA, and while agencies may be meeting the letter of the law, they certainly are not meeting the intent of the law. So my question to both of you, do you believe that sending a notification to Congress simply saying that an intrusion into your agency's network occurred, but not providing any details, is sufficient for effective oversight? Mr. Higgins.
Chairman Peters, with regards to the Department of Commerce, when we encountered the incident, we took in consideration a few different things. The nature of the compromise. We took in consideration the systems and information involved. We also took in consideration the stakeholders and customers impacted. Given what we knew, and more importantly, what we did not know, we felt it more than appropriate to notify OMB and CISA and subsequently Congress of a major cybersecurity incident. It's important to note that given the moment, you're not going to have all the information that you need, but we're going to have enough information to share that with CISA and others to prevent any further spreading of malicious activity. So with respect to commerce, it's important that we're transparent and upfront with what we know and what we don't know as soon as we can, so that all bodies involved can make requisite decisions and take the necessary action.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Vogel?
Yes, thank you, John Peters. When we received notice and the details of an incident, we were able to respond very quickly with an assessment of whether we had been compromised and the impact of that. As we looked at the impact against the criteria, we felt that we had not lost any data. We had also firewalled everything appropriately, that there wouldn't be follow-up activity. And so we also, we determined right away we did not believe this was a major incident. Certainly a very sophisticated and complicated event, but we confirmed with CISA and also our OMB desk officer our determination that we would not declare a major incident at that time. Again, if we had received more information, if we had gotten other signs of activity, we would have revisited that decision right away, and we would have conferred with the CISA, who had details that they could share with us about what was going on in other departments.
Very well. Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I must say I'm concerned that HHS didn't report. I mean, under FISMA, it's pretty clear when you look at the definition, that a report would have been required. Any incident likely to result in a demonstrable harm to the national security interests, foreign relations, or economy, or a breach involving personal identifiable information. So maybe we need to tighten up that FISMA requirement, because the CISA requirement and the OMB requirement is far more specific. And you know, I appreciate the fact that Commerce did report to Congress. Thank you. And I'm concerned that HHS did not. And Ms. Vogel, I understand that, you know, you all looked at you know, what the impact was on HHS, but to me, this was definitely a major incident. And certainly it was in terms of the relationship between the different agencies. So I would agree with what the chairman at least implied in his questioning, which is that at least, you know, give us the opportunity to get notified of these so that we can do our proper oversight and be sure that, you know, we're putting together legislation that makes sense to respond to these attacks. With regard to Colonial Pipeline, I know today's focus is about federal cybersecurity attacks, but this Colonial Pipeline one, as I said earlier, probably the biggest attack ever on American infrastructure, certainly the biggest one that we know of. Colonial supplies almost half of the oil to the East Coast. The systems remain offline today as we talk. They've made some progress understanding opening up some lines, but not all the way to the East Coast. My hope is by the end of this week, you know, that will be improved. But this is a stark example of how these cyber attacks can have real demonstrable impacts on our economy and our national security. Ask the people who are in East Coast states about what they're paying for gasoline today at the pump, and they will tell you it has impact. There are a variety of tools and guidance to combat ransomware at CISA, Mr. Wales, but as we've seen here, you know, we are not effectively combating ransomware. Let me ask you a couple questions. Did Colonial contact you?
They did not contact CISA directly.
So they did not contact CISA. Did CISA contact Colonial?
We were brought in by the FBI after they were notified about the incident.
Okay. Would it have been helpful to you if Colonial had contacted you immediately to provide information so you could respond more effectively?
So we received information fairly quickly in concert with the FBI. I think right now we are waiting for additional technical information on exactly what happened at Colonial so that we can use that information to potentially protect other potential victims down the road.
So you still don't have the technical information you need to be able to be responsive and to provide support to critical infrastructure. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but that is not surprising given that it's, you know, they've only been working on the incident response since over the weekend, and it's fairly early. We have had historically good relationship with both Colonial as well as the cybersecurity firms that are working on their behalf. We do expect information to come from that, and when we have it, we will use it to help improve cybersecurity more broadly.
If the FBI had not brought you in, would Colonial, do you think, have contacted you to ask for your assistance?
No.
Do you think that's a problem?
I think that there is benefit when CISA is brought in quickly because the information that we glean, we work to share it in a broader fashion to protect other critical infrastructure.
Right. I think that's the point, is that, one, you could have helped Colonial, but two, you know, having that technical information enables you to help other critical infrastructure. And if there's ransomware focused on Colonial, there's likely to be ransomware focused on other critical infrastructure as well. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Well, we appreciate your testimony today about the need for more funding, for preparedness funding, for CISA funding, the need to transform some of our systems and the cost of that. But it seems to me we also have to worry about these attacks, whether they're direct cyber attacks in the federal government or whether they are attacks in the private sector, whether they are ransomware attacks, being communicated to CISA, in that, you know, you've got the expertise. We've passed a lot of funding already and a lot of bipartisan legislation to help you all have the tools that you need. It seems to me we've got to be sure that communication flow is happening. By the way, just a general question, and you know, I look forward to a second round. We can get into more of this, but my sense is that we have a number of vulnerabilities at the federal level. One is the systems themselves. In other words, the software, in particular, some of the hardware is not updated. Is that accurate?
There are legacy systems in the federal government that require modernization, absolutely.
And is that where you would focus most of the funding immediately? What would be your top target? Because also we have a lot of discussion on this committee about personnel and ensuring we have, the best and the brightest with the federal government to be able to protect our personal information and national security. We also know that, there is concern about practices. In other words, even with the best personnel and with the best infrastructure, software and hardware, if you aren't following the right practices, the so-called cyber hygiene to be able to protect your systems, to be able to provide the appropriate encryption and so on, that is difficult to defend against these attacks. How would you prioritize those, and where would you prioritize the funding?
Yeah, I don't think you can prioritize among those three. Those are areas that, as you're deploying new technology, those all need to advance in parallel. You need to ensure that as you put in place new systems, you've got the people that are actually capable of utilizing them to improve your security. You need to have people who have the ability to configure them in the right way. We see this a lot, particularly with the move to the cloud, in particular at the state and local level. They'll deploy on the cloud, but they'll misconfigure their cloud environment and make it open and accessible to potential malicious actors. And so you want to ensure that your technology, your people, and your processes are being modernized together, because if any one of those lags behind, you're going to introduce weaknesses into your overall information security program.
Well, that's the idea in having Cisa have more responsibility and more funding and the expertise, and so we need to continue to work on that. But again, we've done a lot to provide the tools, and now the question is, how do you bring those three elements and others together? And we got to do it yesterday, because these attacks continue.
But sir, I would also add that it's not just CISA, because ultimately the agencies are the ones that are deploying technology on their environment to support the operational needs of their mission. And as they do so, they need to do it with security in mind. They need to build that kind of security and resilience in. They need to build in those kind of zero trust principles to ensure that their systems are protected. And they need to ensure that they have the right people and processes in place. We can assist them. We provide best practices. In some cases, we provide technology. But overall, managing that information security program at an agency is essential. And I think that's why we need to ensure that the CISOs, like those joining me today, are kind of empowered and resourced to be able to support the needs and the security of their agency.
Empowered and resourced and held accountable for what happens at those agencies, including the reporting we talked about earlier, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Portman, and accountability is critically important. I couldn't agree more. Senator Carper, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine, Senator.
All right. Let me just start off by saying to Director Wales, thank you for serving as our acting director in this capacity for a number of months. I just want to thank you for that and for your continued service. I understand someone else has been nominated to succeed you, but you'll be continuing in this post for a while, and we thank you for that. In your testimony, you described how how CISA has the unique ability to gather and to analyze information from the federal civilian networks. With data received from the intelligence community, from private sector and state and local, tribal and territorial partners. Could you take a moment, please, and explain how CISA's unique role and its ability to access information across various sectors has helped the agency respond to the SolarWinds attack?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the kind words, and your question, I think, is important. And it gets into a bit of the exchange that I was having with Senator Portman. CISA's unique responsibility is to help the broad community improve their cybersecurity. We're the only federal agency charged with getting information out to support everyone's cybersecurity and resilience. But for us to do that, we need to be fed the right information from all of our partners. That means from the intelligence community, getting understanding of where the adversaries are focusing, the tactics and techniques that they're using. It means gaining access from our private sector colleagues and our state and local governments about what they're seeing on their networks. And the earlier we have that information and the more information we're able to bring together, the better picture that we can provide about what is happening, what vulnerabilities or adversaries are attempting to exploit, what techniques that they're using, what signatures we can load into the defensive systems, what new tools we need to deploy. But that all requires to be fed, and that information coming together in one place. And I think that is Cisa's focus, enhancing our ability to take that information in, to analyze it and get it out, because ultimately we have that responsibility of helping to improve the cybersecurity baseline across the country, across sectors, across the public and private divide, and make our country more secure. And I think we work hard every day to build that collective defense model, but it does require support. It does require collaboration from our industry and from our state and local governments. I think we have worked hard over the past several years to build trust that enables that to happen, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us.
All right. Thank you for that response. I have a follow-up for Mr. Higgins and also for Ms. Vogel. Thank you both for joining us today and for your continued service. I frequently say that the two most important ingredients to a healthy democracy are the same two ingredients that are helpful for a healthy marriage, and they are collaboration and communication. I believe that Cisa's work to protect and defend our federal government networks and to help agencies respond to cyber incidents requires the same thing, collaboration and communication. Mr. Higgins and Ms. Vogel, could each of you take a moment to describe how Cisa helped your respective agencies respond to and protect against the SolarWinds attack? Go right ahead. Mr. Higgins, you go first.
Certainly, Senator. So with regards to the support that we received from Cisa, they were instrumental in helping us with regards to incident response, threat hunting, analysis of logs, analysis of forensic images as well, but also information sharing. I think throughout the course of the engagement, Cisa was a partner the whole way. They augmented our current capabilities and provided us with very informative lessons learned that we can use to fortify our cybersecurity defenses moving forward that feed into our long-term objectives in terms of our strategies, our policies, our procedures. So we're very fortunate and appreciative of the support that we did receive from Cisa.
Thanks for that. Ms. Vogel, how could you describe for us, same questions, describe for us how Cisa helped your agency respond to and protect against the SolarWinds attack?
Certainly, and thank you for your words. We were able to share information with Cisa and our private sector partners, our focus being on health and human services for the country. We're in multiple organizations that share information on cybersecurity, especially in the healthcare sector. Cisa is able to give us tools and information that they can gather from other sectors that might apply in our environments. Not every instance is the same, and our business within HHS is much varied over many different types of business. Cisa has provided information collaboration opportunities for us that have been able to let us engage with other departments on specific needs and in specific areas. So definitely they have facilitated collaboration and communication for us.
Good, thanks for that. A brief follow-up question, same question for each of you. How can we improve interagency communication and collaboration between Cisa and other government agencies, not only after a cyber incident, but before one occurs? Ms. Vogel, would you go first?
Certainly. Currently, we interact with Cisa colleagues on a regular basis. I meet with my colleagues. We also have multiple work groups. And in those work groups, they look at the technical environment at the time and what to do. They work side by side when solving problems or doing research. We have more opportunities for communication and collaboration as new events develop. We're also working on resiliency to be prepared to be able to mitigate any potential threats that come. So in our opportunities to engage with Cisa, we feel that there is an extremely beneficial back and forth that we work with them on about a daily basis.
Yeah, and Mr. Higgins, briefly respond to the same question, please.
Yes, Senator. So I think collaborating and communicating not only when something goes wrong, but all the time. I think it has to be an ongoing endeavor. And with regards to the other item, I would say making sure that Cisa has a requisite visibility within your environment so that they can take the requisite actions as opposed to waiting for a data call or something to that effect. So I think there's a lot of technology that we can implement within our environment to ensure that Cisa has visibility so that when something does happen, it lessens the time frame by which case they can act and we can communicate with them.
All right. My thanks to both of them, and thank you to our director as well. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Thanks, Senator.
Senator Carper. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Picking up a little bit with what Senator Carper was talking about of cooperation, collaboration between the agencies, I think it's one of the reasons we help facilitate the passage and now hopefully the appointment of a national cyber director so that we have somebody in charge, somebody can be held accountable, and somebody can force that collaboration. So I'm looking forward to meeting with the nominee here shortly, and hopefully we can get that individual confirmed and on the job and being held accountable. Mr. Wales, there's not a problem since I've been here 10, going on 11 years, that the solution isn't always more funding. CISA's budget's around $2 billion a year, correct?
Correct.
DHS total about 2.6. The federal government in total for 2021 will spend almost $19 billion on cybersecurity. But in the real world, that's a lot of money. Have you done kind of a soup to nuts, zero-based budgeting to determine what it is, how you're already spending the $2 billion? And let's face it, whether it's the OPM hack, the SolarWinds, just keeps happening. And again, this is not an easy issue. I understand that, but unfortunately, I've been in this role now for many years and listening to kind of the same bureaucratic explanations, the same collaboration, information sharing, which I think is all important, but these problems are still happening. Have you really done a deep dive in terms of what CISA does and what these agencies are spending all this $19 billion on?
Sure. So I can certainly talk within CISA. We have looked hard at our budget to make trade-off decisions about where we need to invest our resources, to be smart about ensuring that we're applying resources in the areas that need it most. I think that the challenge that we face across the entire United States government is twofold. First is that we're in a bit of a technology and cybersecurity deficit, that we have not invested to the degree necessary over time, particularly in modernizing legacy systems that have vulnerabilities.
Should we maybe the $1.9 billion COVID relief package maybe put some of that $1.9 trillion toward this? Or if we're talking about infrastructure, should we maybe be, if we're going to spend money on infrastructure, spend it on that? And I want some short answers here because I've got a lot of questions.
Sure. So I will say that we believe that any infrastructure development should have cybersecurity, security, and resilience built in up front. I'll leave it to you about how best to achieve those goals. But I just want to make one really fast point, which is the challenge in cyber is that the threats and the technology are advancing substantially. So technology that we deployed 15 years ago needs substantial modernization today to ensure that it keeps pace with the threats that we're now facing.
And the federal government has a hard time keeping pace. Let me just ask you, have you connected the dots? Or are you trying to connect the dots or looking to see if they're connected between the SolarWinds hack and what happened to Colonial Pipeline? And the reason I ask this is my concern about what happened to Colonial Pipeline is it's just a shot across the bow. I mean, these hacks, what was achieved with SolarWinds is it's gathering information to be used at some point in time. Are we looking seriously in terms of how they may use that information and whether or not this might have been connected to the Colonial Pipeline?
We are looking hard at the information that the adversary gleaned from SolarWinds, looking at reflections in intelligence, and the FBI is actively investigating the Colonial Pipeline incident. What I can say is they've positively attributed this incident to the DarkSide ransomware crew, which is a criminal enterprise, and it is not surprising that a criminal enterprise is going after increasingly important targets for ransomware operations. We've seen this over the past 2 years. They're going after bigger players to get bigger ransoms. Ransoms last year went up to around $300,000 for the small ones and millions of dollars for the big ones. So it is not a
Right,
surprise.
we understand that's a problem. Again, we're trying to figure out how to prevent it. I want to shift a little bit in terms of the vulnerability of our electrical grid, because that's really, to a certain extent, what the Colonial Pipeline hack is about. We saw the Texas power outage. As we move toward the Internet of Things, as we become more and more connected, we become way more vulnerable. As we move toward this green energy utopia, I'm highly concerned that we are making our electrical grid even more vulnerable to these types of attacks. Again, that's what I'm saying. Is this just a shot across the bow? I don't think we have even come close to addressing the vulnerability of our grid. Again, infrastructure package, I'm not hearing anybody talk about purchasing in advance these large power transformers that could be wiped out in an EMP, GMD, or a cyber attack, and they're irreplaceable, basically, in a short period of time. We're just not thinking through how incredibly vulnerable we are. We're shutting down nuclear energy plants. The fact that we are allowing homeowners to tie into the grid, to sell back energy from their solar panels, address how unbelievably vulnerable we truly are in our electrical grid, and how a move toward green energy is potentially probably making us even more vulnerable. Is that something CISA is really looking at? Because you're way more than cybersecurity. You're about infrastructure security.
Sure, and we are working very closely with the Energy Department as well as the Transportation Security Administration, which is responsible for security of pipelines, particularly focused on natural gas pipelines that are feeding electric power generating units across the country. We have worked hard to do assessments on pipelines, particularly looking at their SCADA systems, their industrial control systems, the operational networks that manage and run these complex systems, to provide as much as we can in terms of advice, recommendations for improving the network architectures, making improvements to their baseline level of cybersecurity, how they can improve network segmentation to avoid disruptions on business systems impacting operational systems. So that has been a significant focus of CISA's work over the past year.
But again, would you agree we're becoming more vulnerable?
I would say that
rather than creating island grids, we're becoming more and more connected and leaving us even more and more vulnerable. Isn't that correct?
What I would say is that because of the deployment of technology, we are becoming more susceptible to cybersecurity risk in more parts of our infrastructure, more parts of our manufacturing, more parts of our healthcare, and we need to work hard to ensure that we're providing security around those new systems.
Well, thanks for that answer. And Mr. Chairman, I would like certainly this committee, and I'd like this administration to really focus on the vulnerability, because we're not. And we're not making the investments, for example, in those large power transformers. They're irreplaceable, basically, in the short term. We're just not recognizing how vulnerable we are. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Johnson. Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Portman, for holding this hearing. Thank you to our witnesses today for being here on this important national security issue and for your service. I want to start with a question to Ms. Vogel and Mr. Higgins. Our other witness, Mr. Wales, has previously testified that the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, or CDM, will continue to be an integral part of securing the federal government's network, including through the addition of more capabilities such as endpoint detection and response tools. I agree with Mr. Wales, which is why Senator Cornyn and I introduced a bill last Congress to codify CDM. But I'm also interested to hear about CDM from the perspective of those agencies implementing it. So, Ms. Vogel and Mr. Higgins, how does CDM factor into the plans for improving your agency's cybersecurity, and what challenges, if any, have you encountered in implementing CDM? And Ms. Vogel, we can start with you.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. CDM has been quite a challenge, and that's because it is a huge effort. It is looking into all the complexities of our multiple operating divisions within HHS. And in doing so, we encounter different scenarios, different status of modernization, and each of those areas has to be tailored to a specific requirement, and it means we have to change software, hardware, whatever we do. So it's a very, very complex activity. We have found, though, that what is provided really helps us as a department, because as we have implemented the different aspects of CDM, we're getting more information more timely. And that means we can respond to anything that we see going on our network or anywhere else. We see that faster, we can respond faster.
Okay,
that
thank you.
helps mitigate any of the potential damage.
Thank you.
So
I'm gonna-
we're very encouraged by the success of CDM so far, and we are looking forward to the expansion to help us manage the cybersecurity risks in HHS.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins?
Yes, Senator. So CDM plays an integral role within the Department of Commerce in terms of fortifying our cybersecurity posture. We as well are working very closely with Cisa to roll out the various phases. With regards to challenges, you're always going to have things like integration, duplication, ensuring that you're not purchasing things for the sake of purchasing, but purchasing those things that are going to give you greater security. And making sure that as we purchase things, we can decommission other things to achieve cost savings. So suffice to say, CDM has been a huge success for us. We have a lot of work to do. The challenges may persist, but we look very much forward to continuing CDM implementation throughout the department.
Well, thank you. And just quickly for each of you, would it be helpful to your agencies if additional capabilities were made available, such as endpoint detection and response tools? Mr. Higgins?
Absolutely, Senator.
Yeah. And Ms. Vogel?
Yes, that's
Thank you. To Mr. Wales, the Department of Homeland Security recently launched its cybersecurity workforce sprint with the goal of hiring 200 cybersecurity professionals by July, including 100 at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, your agency, Cisa. We all recognize that this is a really short time frame. So how are DHS and Cisa going to accomplish this goal?
Sure, thank you, Senator. And I think going to Senator Portman's question earlier, the people are instrumental.
Yeah.
They are critical to all the things that we do in CISA to achieve our goals, whether it's program management of complex programs like CDM or technical expertise that we're providing to agencies. We are using a number of different avenues to recruit our cybersecurity workforce. Part of that includes using new programs that the department is rolling out. For example, an honors program focused on new graduates to bring in new professionals into the workforce. Part of it is using our existing array of authorities. We're doing a lot of recruiting events, particularly at minority-serving institutions during this period. And our goal is to begin to fill our ranks more quickly. I will say we've made a lot of progress. We've hired more people in the first 6 months of 2021 than we have in the previous 2 years. But we've got a lot more work to do. We still have vacancies to fill, and we're going to use as many tools as we can to fill them.
Thank you. Will DHS use the special hiring authorities for cybersecurity positions Congress granted it in 2014, which has turned into the Cyber Talent Management System? And when do you expect it to be operational if you're going to use that?
So right now, the department is indicating that they believe it'll be fully up and running in the fall. And as soon as it is up and running, we're ready to begin using it to hire folks. We've been working to identify the types of positions that we think are best filled using the Cyber Talent Management System approach. We've worked hard with the department to build out the testing around the specific positions. And so we're ready to use it as soon as the program is live. And
why has it taken so long to get there? This was authority granted in 2014.
Sure. So, I'm not best positioned to talk about the length of time that the department. This was a program that was managed by the department's chief human capital officer. However, I will say, in order for us to do it, we have to roll out a fairly significant new human capital system, completely doing away with the existing general schedule that we have used since the 1920s or 40s. And it's required a large-scale rulemaking effort that is finishing up now. It's taken longer than I think anyone wanted, but it appears that we are on the cusp of getting the program live, and we're ready to use it when it is.
Okay, and then I just wanted to follow up. You mentioned that you were also focused in your recruiting on minority institutions that serve minority students. Is CISA also considering creating cyber apprenticeships that will allow people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds to get trained up without the upfront education and credentialing costs typically needed for cybersecurity positions?
I'm not aware of a specific apprenticeship program that we have, but let me talk to the staff and see. There may be some things under development in our education and training team.
Yeah, one of the things, and I'll finish with this and follow up with more questions on the record, but one of the things I think is really important is to understand that sometimes we have job descriptions and requirements that are pretty outdated and rigid. And when you think about the kind of apprenticeship training we could do or credentialing that we could do in a much more pathway-focused manner, it could really be a big boon here. So I'd look forward to discussing this with you further. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. I need to step out momentarily to ask questions at the Armed Services Committee hearing that is going on now, so I will pass the gavel to Ranking Member Portman. But before I step out, Senator Langford, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Wells, let me walk through a little bit of a timeline. I've got a broader question. It was December the 8th of last year that FireEye notifies everyone, hey, there's a problem. We've detected what we consider a foreign actor that's somewhere that is ingrained in our system. A few days later, on December the 13th, FireEye announced that it was compromised through SolarWinds through the Orion platform. And then it starts this chain of looking at who has SolarWinds, who has used the Orion platform, what does that look like, and it suddenly gets announced. A lot of federal entities have that, a lot of private entities have that, and it changed down from there. My question is, had FireEye not found this December the 8th, would it still be operational today?
I don't know that we're capable of answering that question fully. There may be other ways in which either the public or the private sector could have identified that activity. But I've said before that our private sector cybersecurity capability in this country is a true asset, one that helps the overall security of our country every day. And we are lucky to have firms like FireEye and the other cybersecurity firms out there who are looking for vulnerabilities, looking for potential compromises, making the government aware to ensure that we can get ahead of it. And I will just add one change to your timeline, which is FireEye notified us of potential compromises earlier than December 8th, so that we could begin to understand what happened, begin to look at our own networks, and we are really appreciative of the partnership that we have with FireEye and other players.
So the challenge is the vulnerability here as we walk through this, because had FireEye not found this and said this is in our system, we've experienced an attack on it, and then start trying to figure out where it came from and realizing that it could be in a lot of other places that they had it, it was in other places as well. The challenge that we have is how do we actually get onto this earlier and what systems do we have in place? I understand zero-day attacks and that there are some things that are entirely novel. I get that as this was through the process. But when I go through your testimony earlier and what your written testimony is, there's a lot of detail about the response, and it seems to be very detailed. That CISA's work in response to this campaign has 4 lines of effort: scoping, sharing the information, detection techniques, short-term remediation, long-term strategic recovery. You're very focused on what happens after the fact. My question is, are we that focused on before, on detection? Walk me through the process that CISA has in place in working with contractors and with government entities to be able to help determine things in advance. I know they're there. Walk me through those.
Sure. So I think that there are approaches that we're taking now, and then there are additional ways in which we want to improve our ability to detect compromises earlier. So right now, the federal government, as you know, deploys technology on the perimeter of the federal enterprise, looking for signatures of known malicious activity. When we get those, we then work with the agency where that incident is being targeted to look inside of their systems. What are they seeing? Because they have deeper insight in terms of what's happening on their individual networks. In the future, as I've talked about previously, we need to move deeper into networks. So an event like SolarWinds, you're never going to detect at the perimeter. You're never going to detect at the edge. Right. You need to be looking on individual hosts on individual servers and workstations for when those start to behave in anomalous fashions. So should your SolarWinds device all of a sudden start talking on an encrypted channel with the server outside of your network that it's never spoken to before and probably shouldn't, that could get alerted more quickly. And so as Senator Hassan mentioned, the deployment of things like endpoint detection and response tools on those critical devices inside of network will give both the agencies and CISA deeper insight into what's happening there and be able to alert and queue us more quickly to incidents like this. Again, there's no silver bullet, but we believe that additional layers of visibility, additional improvements in network segmentation, additional improvements in how networks are architected and configured continues to drive adversaries to more complicated and sophisticated attacks, reduces the likelihood that they are successful, and increases the likelihood that we will detect them more quickly.
So which agencies are leading in that effort right now? Because obviously any agency could already do that.
Sure, and most agencies have begun to deploy things like endpoint detection tools on their network. What we are using is the additional money provided through the American Rescue Plan Act to really expand that more quickly to more agencies. And again, partly this is a funding issue, and then partly this is how do you take that information that's coming from these new tools and sensors, and how do you integrate it into improved visibility and action inside of agencies and with CISA. And so that is the work that we are undertaking today.
So individual contractors and certification of the contractors of what they have to achieve, and then accountability for those contractors when they fail to achieve those.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work that we need to do in the supply chain realm. The government is actively working on a cyber executive order that will begin to address some of that. But we know that the improvements in the supply chain, particularly for federal agency software, is critical, and we think it'll have tangible benefits for the private sector as companies who sell to the federal government make systemic improvements that will benefit everyone.
Right. 6 years ago, we were in a conversation in a hearing just like this, where many federal agencies were using virus protection programs that it was discovered that all of their data is routing through Russia. And this room was a little stunned by the whole process to be realized that we didn't verify that no one was really checking those outside contractors, and that many agencies were using materials like that. So I guess my question is now 6 years ago, as we continue to make progress on this, and it has been chipping away for several years, at what point do we get to the balance that we know we're verifying what federal computers are actually using and the providers that are actually doing that, what they're doing with that data? And then also not making this so incredibly difficult that we only have 1 or 2 primes that are out there and expose ourselves to having very few resources that are out there and very little innovation. You've got to strike a difficult balance where we actually are doing oversight but not driving people out of the market.
Yes, and there has been significant improvement in both agencies and across the government looking at supply chain risk management in a more thorough way. And Congress has also provided a number of tools for us, like the Federal Acquisition Security Council, where DHS, DOD, and the ODNI, who are looking at and assessing the potential risk posed by vendors for the federal government, either on the civilian side, the intelligence side, or the defense side, can make decisions and promulgate guidance for the rest of the agencies to remove high-risk software or hardware from their networks. That work is actually just getting started now, but provides us a real mechanism and a framework to actually rid our networks of anything that we think is high risk. CISA has obviously taken action in the past, for example, removing Kaspersky software across the civilian executive branch when we believe that the risk posed by using that software was too high. So we'll take action in the interim, but we now have a more dedicated process to examine the exact issue that you're raising and systematically address it across the entire U.S. government.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Senator Portman, of course, and Chairman Peters for holding this very important hearing. I really appreciate the witnesses for your work in this area. But I'd like to move really right on to our cyber workforce shortage, because GAO has identified the consistent shortage of cybersecurity personnel at federal agencies as high risk. This is to our national security. So recent unprecedented cyber attacks, of course, like SolarWinds, the Colonial Pipeline breaches. They really demonstrate the urgency of equipping the U.S. government with the cyber talent that we need to prevent and respond to these attacks. So to address this gap, last year I co-led Senator Wicker's PACT Act as bipartisan legislation that was included in last year's NDAA that increases resources and pathways for expanded cyber workforce. I also recently introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Blackburn to establish a civilian cybersecurity reserve at both DHS and DOD. So, Mr. Wales, how can CISA utilize pre-existing links between the private sector and the federal government to mobilize a cybersecurity surge capacity at our times of greatest need?
Sure, Senator. It's an important question, and I think one that was, in some respects, the basis for our strong support for the Cyber Response and Recovery Fund concept. I know that it's being considered as part of the S1316, but for us, it's really about how do we ensure we have the right resources, and part of the way in which we will obviously use those resources is calling upon the significant private sector capacity we have in the country to support us when we have incidents that are significant and when our capabilities are being stretched to the limit. We are lucky we've not actually got to that point yet, but we know that with our adversaries growing more aggressive, it's only a matter of time before a catastrophic cyber incident really requires us to expand our capabilities beyond those that we have on board. And I think we're eager to work with Congress on additional ideas that you might have about how to strengthen that, additional tools and capabilities that might be brought to bear, like your concepts related to a reserve contingent. But we want to utilize every available mechanism, whether it's to hire people, whether it's to have surge capacity, or whether it's to have a reserve. So we're looking forward to continue to work with you on that.
Thank you. I'd actually like to move on to something kind of similar, because the SolarWinds attack to me is especially disconcerting because the techniques used were novel. They had never been seen before. So can you talk, of course, in this setting, a little bit about the status of your analysis on the specific techniques that were novel used in the attack, and how that information is being identified to help us do threat hunting, identify new vulnerabilities? Where are we with understanding this new novel threat assessment and trying to plug any gaps there?
Sure. So, and I think the idea is, in many cases, it was a series of kind of small novel techniques that, when coupled together, allowed them to execute an extremely sophisticated attack. So I thought we'd divide into a couple of areas. The first, and this was part of my discussion with Senator Lankford, it's how do we ensure confidence in the supply chain, particularly of software that is provided to the federal government. And there are a number of things that we are doing to help improve the work that the federal government has to ensure the security of software that's developed for us. Pushing our contractors to use more defensible, secure software development processes. Inside the government, it makes a huge difference about our understanding of how critical systems are configured, the ports and protocols that are used. So CISA is looking at kind of the full array of our authorities, including resources granted under the American Rescue Plan Act to allow us to deploy technology to federal agencies. We're looking at in addition, how do we use our binding operational directive authority to focus agencies on closing gaps in their security and configuration architecture? And then finally, one of the, I think, real lessons out of SolarWinds was the exploitation of cloud environments, particularly Microsoft Office 365 cloud environments for federal agencies, and the challenges with visibility and logging that federal agencies and CISA had for what was happening inside of these cloud environments. So part of additional of our resources under the American Rescue Plan Act is standing up a secure, threat-hardened cloud environment and to pilot that out and then promulgate the reference architecture across the federal government to help improve the security of cloud environments for all of our federal partners. And so there's a lot of work based upon the lessons that we've learned from SolarWinds and building that into our programmatic structure whether it's technology, whether it's processes, whether it's directives, to ensure that we're using every capability we have to improve our security.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to quickly to another important area, hospital cybersecurity. We have small rural hospitals all over this country. They are understaffed. Medically, they're understaffed in the technology area. They may not have all the resources. And so they are high value targets for some of these hackers. And so I guess we only have about a minute left. So to both of you, do you think it might be helpful to directly embed CISA cybersecurity advisors into HHS regional offices to help some of our rural hospitals or smaller health centers so they don't become victims, and just have a collaborative boots on the ground kind of approach? So I guess we can start with Ms. Vogel, please.
Thank you. Yes, we are looking at how to reinforce the capabilities that we have in our regional offices. Each of the operating divisions in HHS brings their perspective to our regional office for coordination. Now, outreach and education is critical, and we support that by putting out cybersecurity documentation, alerts, awareness packages on a regular basis. Last year alone, we sent out to the public health sector over 97 documents that help them in a situation of cybersecurity vulnerability. So we're trying to educate them, and other assistance would really make a difference.
Well, thank you. I'll take my other questions for the record, but I think this is an area where some better collaboration can really help our most vulnerable communities, particularly in the healthcare space. Thank you.
Senator Rosen, thank you very much for your questions. I'm not sure who we have next. I think Senator Ossoff and Senator Hawley might be online. Are you there? Okay, in the absence of Senator Ossoff or Senator Hawley, is Senator Romney online by chance? Okay. Well, we're going to go to the second round then, and I'll start off. My first question has to do with a letter that Chairman Peters and I sent to Cisa back on April 5th. Mr. Wales, I know you're aware of this letter, and we asked that by April 20th we have a response. It's important that we have the best information possible to be able to deal with two things. One is reauthorization of some of your programs that is occurring next year. We want to be smart about this and be sure that as we're reauthorizing things like the Einstein program, that it's done properly. But second, we're also working on legislation, as I said earlier, to ensure that we can respond to immediate threats and strengthen, your abilities, frankly. We're concerned that we haven't had a response yet, except for a few documents, all of which had previously been provided, I'm told, to this committee and to the Congress. Will you commit to providing a complete response to the letter this morning?
Yes, we will respond. I know that we are in active discussions with your staff, and that actually a briefing has been set for next week with the department, who obviously has responsibility for DHS systems, including some of that Cisa that supports Cisa. And Cisa will provide to the committee next week that get into some of the more details of some of the questions that were asked as part of the letter. But we are actively working this to ensure we provide as complete a response as possible.
Can you give us a time frame?
I cannot sitting here right now, but we are working with your staff to provide as much detail as possible, as quickly as possible.
Well, let's suggest a time frame here this morning that's appropriate. 2 weeks?
We will work in 2 weeks to provide as much information as we can. And again, my one concern is Cisa does not have all of the information, is not the, particularly where questions related to the
If there's something we've asked that's inappropriate, let us know. But my sense is that what we've asked is relevant and appropriate to your reauthorizations, and frankly, coming up with legislation that's more helpful to responding to some of the attacks we talked about today.
Nope. And my only concern is that I can't agree on behalf of the entire department because the DHS CIO is the one ultimately responsible for DHS systems. And
let's set a milestone in 2 weeks that we'll have substantially all the answers, at least those that you have the ability to answer.
Okay.
Because I think sooner the better, since we're moving ahead with legislation even during this month before the next congressional recess.
Agreed.
Second is, we talked a lot about funding today, and the American Rescue Plan, as you know, provided $650 million to Cisa for various ways to help modernize cyber systems. You mentioned hardening the cloud earlier. Can you, in 1 minute, just tell us or less, precisely how you expect to use that $650 million.
Sure. So four primary lines of effort. First is beginning to expand our cyber defensive teams so that we can spend more time doing persistent hunt activity inside of federal agencies. Second is the deployment of new technologies and sensors inside of networks, endpoint detection and response tools that will give us better visibility for agencies and better visibility for CISA into what's happening on those networks. Three, the deployment of pilot secure threat-hardened cloud environment for business systems to allow us to test the most effective way to secure and defend those, and then promulgate a reference architecture across the .gov.
That would be focused primarily on the private sector and their ability to use a hardened cloud?
Well, it's primarily focused on testing a private cloud for the federal government, civilian agencies that more federal agencies can then use. Right now, there is, I'd say, a variety of different kind of cloud security environments that federal agencies have adopted, and we want more consistency.
Some more secure than others, okay. But it wouldn't respond to the colonial type challenge?
No, I mean, again, you know, the
What's the fourth one?
The fourth one is additional funding to help accelerate the move towards more defensible and secure architectures. It's helping agencies move towards zero trust-based approaches for their security and build more defensible and secure network configurations and architecture.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. This was part of the COVID-19 package, American Rescue Package. I'm glad the money is being used and used productively. I can't see how it has any connection to COVID-19, by the way, which is unfortunately true with much of that legislation. But the money's been appropriated. We need the help right now, and we will be eager to see, you know, how this money is being spent. We'll be overseeing it, and my sense is that what you're doing is going to be helpful to the broader mission of CISA that we're trying to work on through legislation. Final question has to do with what just happened with regard to SolarWinds. There has been a news report that has not been confirmed or denied by Department of Homeland Security that the SolarWinds attack not only attacked agencies and, as you know, had a major detrimental impact on 9 different federal agencies at least, but specifically it was an attack on DHS. And that 2 areas, according to this report, were subject to this massive attack. One is DHS's foreign threat hunting teams were actually breached. And second is that the Secretary of DHS's email account was actually breached. Can you confirm that that's true?
Sir, in an open hearing, what I can say is that a small number of accounts at the department and at CISA were compromised during this incident. And
are the foreign threat hunting teams part of CISA?
we have threat hunting teams. Again, I'm not sure about the use of the term foreign there, but we do have threat hunting teams. Those are the teams that provide incident response and hunt support to our federal agency partners. But I will just make one small comment, and that is the compromise at DHS only affected our business email networks, did not affect our operational networks where most of our cybersecurity work is done, things that manage our Einstein system, the system that our incident response teams use as part of when they go on site and support other agencies. So this would be, the compromises were limited to business email and not to our actual operational work.
Can you confirm that the Secretary's email account was breached?
I'm going to defer that question to the department's CIO, who was responsible for it.
As you know, former Secretary Wolf confirmed publicly that his email account was breached. He said so on April 12th, 2021. I'd also like to put the AP story in the record. I'd like to ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to do so. That indicated that the former Secretary and that DHS was compromised by this attack. We need to know the information. And if it's classified, we understand. We've had a classified briefing, by the way, since you and I last talked at a public hearing where we would have had the opportunity to receive that information, and we did not. So we need to know what's going on to be able to legislate properly and to provide the proper oversight. I want to end by thanking you for your testimony today, for your ongoing communication with me and our staff and Senator Peters and his staff, and your professionalism. It's an impossible task right now the enemy is moving very quickly, both foreign state actors and cyber criminals. And we have to move even more quickly. We have to stay ahead of them. And whether it's personnel and dragging our feet on having the right cyber workforce is a major frustration to me and the federal government. We talked about the 2014 legislation that's still not properly enacted, or whether it's with regard to keeping our systems up to speed, and particularly what's going on in the cloud. We have to stay ahead of them. And so I hope you will remain committed to this task and provide the leadership to be able to respond to this very difficult challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Portman. And you're absolutely right. We need to have the information. We'll endeavor to make sure that that happens. We certainly do not have infinite resources, and we need to evaluate the risk facing our most sensitive system, which continue to fall victim to these attacks, as we've talked about throughout this hearing. As Ranking Member Portman brought up, we've got at least 2 cabinet secretaries that were targeted. So my question is first to Ms. Vogel. How does HHS assess its risk posture to cyber attacks? And then how do you allocate resources against those risks?
Thank you for the question. When it comes to risk, one of the things that we've become very engaged in is our Enterprise Risk Management Council, where we bring different risks together and then we're able to balance them and look at what we can all do from different disciplines on protecting the department. When we look at our risk, we have a risk score that we look through all of the regulations, and we apply our current assessment of our activities against that. This is a continually changing environment, and we have to go back to that time and time again. So as we look at this, some of the things that we recognize is, for example, in the past where we looked very strongly towards penetration testing to protect us at the perimeter, we're now looking more internally to see through threat hunting teams how we can think ahead and be creative, because we know our adversaries are doing that. So as we look at that, we are slightly shifting some of our resources, and we're looking at what we can do more towards identity and access and restricting to go towards more of a zero trust type of environment. That, and in addition, we're trying to balance the operational technology with the business technology. So one won't necessarily work without the other, but we're also trying to protect it system by system, environment by environment. Those are some of the things that we're doing right now, and we're doing quite a bit of outreach and education because we feel that our employees are our first protection. They'll notice things and report things. We're trying to get them on board and not think of cybersecurity as something separate or something somebody else is supposed to do. So as we incorporate that in our work environment, we're also trying to balance the risk. That gives us a lot more coverage. And those are some of the things that we're doing now.
So those are within the department. Kind of a follow-up question to that is, how does some of the recent supply chain compromises of federal vendors that we have seen, how does that change your risk assessment, and how dynamic is that?
We take that very seriously. One of the major risks that we've addressed as a department recently is acquisition, and looking at upfront what we can do to build in that prevention based on supply chain needs. We also have an area that looks just at medical devices and keeping them up to date and making sure that we share enough information with the healthcare community that they can be as protected at their end as possible. So we look internally and we look externally.
Very good. Senator Hawley, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Wales, if I could just start with you. In the first SolarWinds attack, it's been publicly reported that there were approximately 100 private sector companies that were affected. I'm wondering if there's anything you could tell us about the profile of these companies, if there are any common threads. Were they largely, for instance, technology companies or finance companies or industrial companies?
Sure, they were largely in the technology space, although there were a couple in the nonprofit space. You could imagine the kind of entities that a foreign intelligence service would want to compromise to gain information about U.S. thinking on critical foreign policy questions.
And is that what you think is the common thread here in terms of the companies that were targeted, the private sector companies that were targeted?
I would say that they would fall under kind of two classes of those that had information that the adversary wanted to gain access to, and those that were potentially future avenues for additional attacks, going after additional technology companies. So trying to look for additional opportunities to compromise supply chains.
Got it. Following the first attack, the Cyber Unified Coordination Group put out a joint statement expressing their view that the threat was likely Russian in origin and it was predominantly an intelligence gathering effort. That was January. We're about 5 months on from that. Is that attack still largely viewed as an intelligence gathering effort, or do we think there was, at this juncture, any intention to conduct economic espionage or sabotage of any kind?
So I think right now we understand it to be largely a cyber espionage operation. But I think, as we have said before, once you have this kind of broad access, what you do with it can expand greatly. And so while initially it has been focused on cyber espionage, where it may have gone in the future, we don't know.
Let me ask you about the second publicly reported SolarWinds attack that took place in February, early February of this year. At the time, several non-governmental assessments had attributed that to another state actor, to China. In March, you told me in the committee that much of that public reporting was inaccurate, such as the reporting that said that the National Finance Center had been targeted. To the extent that you're able to say in this setting, is there any update that you can provide us about that second attack?
I don't believe that we have changed our stance on public attribution. What I can say is that another actor did identify a vulnerability in SolarWinds software. So unlike the case of the SVR operation where they inserted a vulnerability, inserted a backdoor, in this case there was just a vulnerability in the software that was discovered by another malicious actor. They did use that to compromise some SolarWinds devices in a number of different places, but the judgment on the National Financing Center has not changed.
And we still believe this is it's a second state actor that carried this out. Are you able to say?
I'm not able to say.
Let me ask you about an article in Reuters recently. An anonymous cybersecurity expert was quoted, who, by the way, had some familiarity with the Post-Secure attack and the federal response. This person was quoted as saying that that attack was a combination of traditional espionage with some element of economic theft. Let me ask you if you think that that assessment is correct, and broadly speaking, did the Pulse attack involve some economic theft?
I'm not aware of any specific economic theft from that operation, but I would say that we are still trying to understand the full scope of what happened during the Post-Secure campaign. There may have been targeting of private sector entities that we are not aware of that would shed further light on the objectives of the adversary in that case.
So is it fair to say that recent attacks that have been attributed to China, like the Pulse attack, have been more focused on economic theft than the Russian-based intelligence gathering cyber attacks like SolarWinds, or do you think that that's a misassessment?
I would say in general that is consistent with our understanding of Chinese targeting objectives.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Mr. Wales, I would certainly hope that Cisa, as the lead operational agency for federal cybersecurity, that you would have a real comprehensive understanding of the cybersecurity risk across the entire federal government, each of the component parts of that. So my question is, and please be very frank, do you have the insight that you need into every agency's risk posture to form that kind of comprehensive understanding right now?
No.
So what do you need? What should this committee focus on to give you the tools necessary to have that kind of comprehensive understanding, which is clearly necessary?
So I think this is an area where to set expectations about our ability to fully understand the risk profile at 102 different federal civilian executive branch agencies, including some large, complex agencies with multiple subcomponents like the ones I'm testifying with today. Fully understanding their risk environment is going to be challenging. They'll use a variety of different systems. Those systems will have various different functions, and understanding the importance of those different functions, what happens if there's a disruption, is always going to be a challenge, regardless of the level of insight we need, the level of insight we have. That being said, I think that there are critical improvements that we want to have, many of which we are already starting based upon the resources in the American Rescue Plan Act, based upon new authorities that we've had provided to us to expand our ability to understand the cybersecurity posture of our federal partners and where critical improvements are needed. And I think I want to start there and then build on that base. And while a full understanding of the risk profile of every federal agency and its sub-elements might be a goal in the future, we've got some shorter-term goals that I think we need to achieve first.
Well, very good. Well, you can count on, as a committee, working closely with you and all of our agencies to make sure we get to the place where we need to be. So I want to take this opportunity to thank, again, our witnesses for testifying here this morning. I think we can all agree on our reliance on cyber infrastructure makes cybersecurity a higher priority, and it's a higher priority each and every passing year. 2021 started with the SolarWinds, and the incidents have just continued to occur. I think we've heard some very interesting things here today as we continue to work on this topic in the weeks, months, and years ahead. FISMA clearly needs some adjustments to ensure agencies and Cisa have the information necessary to understand our risk and allocate our resources to address those risks that have been identified. The law needs to reflect the intent of Congress, so there is no ambiguity, so there's no confusion on when and if an agency needs to declare a major incident and notify Congress about those events. We need to do this by evaluating the scale and the scope of an attack as well as the impact on an individual agency. What we heard today, I think, makes clear that to combat today's cyber enemies, we must work as one holistic federal unit. Our enemies' increased sophistication during the SolarWinds cyber incident and continued willingness to inflict harm on Americans, as witnessed during this weekend's ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, shows that cybersecurity is and is going to remain a national security priority for the foreseeable future. This committee will continue to investigate the scope of these recent incidents, and we're going to work to address the risks and challenges that are critical to helping modernize cyber infrastructure. That includes ensuring our government is prepared to respond efficiently and effectively during a major cyber incident. This committee is also committed to addressing the cyber workforce issues facing the government, as several members discussed during their questions. This is something that I've worked on and want to continue to work very closely with the administration to get done. So again, thank you to all of our witnesses, Ranking Member Portman and other members of the committee. And with that, the hearing record will remain open for 15 days until May 26th at 5 p.m. for the submissions of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.